the bracelet she never took off. The bracelet slipped from her fingers and hit the kitchen floor with a soft metallic sound that somehow echoed louder than it should have. Irene froze. For 11 years that sound had never happened. She stood there in her small Madrid apartment, barefoot, still dressed in her neatly pressed hospital scrubs, staring at the thin silver bracelet lying between the tiles like a quiet accusation. It had been with her through everything.
His oxygen levels
Sleepless
are low.
nights,
We need to act
lonely
quickly.
birthdays, exam failures, career triumphs,
run more
and
tests
the kind of
immediately.
heartbreak that doesn't fade, only
Okay,
hardens.
little one, let's listen
Most
to your
people would
heart.
have thrown it away.
Good job.
She never
being so
did.
brave.
Because once upon a time, a boy had fastened it around her wrist with trembling hands and whispered, "So you don't forget me." And she never had.
You need to
Irene
sign
picked it
this
up
now.
carefully as if
I
it were
can't, it's
fragile
against
glass
protocol.
and clasped
This is
it back
bigger than
onto her wrist.
protocol.
Her fingers
The
lingered
latest
there
results
longer
are
than
very
necessary,
promising.
pressing
That's a
against the
relief to hear.
familiar cool
Thank you,
metal,
doctor.
grounding
We'll monitor
herself
closely.
before the memories could pull her under.
It's all right, little one.
Today was important. Her
Daddy's
first
here.
official
I've got
day
you.
at the most prestigious university hospital in
A
Madrid.
wonderful evening.
Years
really is.
of sacrifice had led
To
to
us.
this moment.
Cheers to that.
Years of being
And to many more.
underestimated,
You
overlooked,
can't hide this
dismissed.
forever.
Years
What
of people
choice did I
seeing a
have?
quiet woman
There's
with modest
always a
clothes and
choice.
assuming
Not for
she was
us.
small, harmless, replaceable. They had been wrong. At 29, Irene Vermejo was one of the most promising pediatric specialists in the country. She had earned her place through sheer resilience, not privilege. No famous surname. No powerful connections. Just discipline, intelligence, and a heart that refused to harden completely, no matter how much it had been broken. She grabbed her medical bag, checked its contents twice, and left the apartment. The metro ride was silent, the city still half asleep. Irene watched people with the detached focus of a doctor even outside the hospital. A man rubbing his temples, a tired mother rocking a stroller, a businessman scrolling anxiously through his phone. Everyone carried something invisible. Some wounds just hid better. As the hospital came into view, tall and imposing, Irene straightened her back. This place represented everything she had fought for. A new beginning. A life where her past no longer defined her. She didn't know yet how cruel destiny could be. 4 hours later, while she was reviewing patient charts with clinical precision, fate walked through the emergency doors carrying a feverish infant in his arms. Javier Llorente had not slept. He hadn't slept properly since the night his wife died in childbirth, leaving him alone with a tiny human who depended on him for everything. The world knew him as a powerful banker, heir to one of the most influential financial dynasties in Spain. None of that mattered when his daughter burned with fever against his chest. Money didn't soothe a baby at 3 a.m. Power didn't stop panic from flooding his veins when he felt how hot her skin was. Pride didn't help him now. He rushed through the emergency department, ignoring curious glances, his tailored suit wrinkled, his voice sharp with barely controlled fear as he demanded help for his 5-month-old daughter. Every instinct in him screamed that something was wrong. When the nurse finally called his name and guided him toward the pediatric consultation room, relief hit him hard, until he opened the door. And the past stepped out to meet him. She stood there in a white coat, stethoscope resting against her chest, hair pulled back neatly. For a second, Javier thought exhaustion was playing tricks on him. Then she looked up. And the world collapsed. Irene's breath caught painfully in her throat. She knew that face. She had memorized it once. The sharp jawline, the storm-gray eyes, the familiar tension in his posture when he was afraid but refused to show it. 11 years disappeared in a heartbeat. The man who had accused her, abandoned her, erased her without listening, was standing in her consultation room holding a baby. Javier felt it too, the shock, the disbelief, the violent collision of memory and reality. He had convinced himself he hated her. He had built an entire life around that belief. And yet, seeing her again, standing calm and composed, something inside him cracked. But then the baby whimpered softly. Reality returned. Irene moved first. Professional instinct snapped into place like armor. "Please place the baby on the examination table," she said evenly, her voice steady despite the chaos roaring inside her chest. Javier hesitated. For a single second he considered turning around and walking out, finding another doctor, another hospital, anywhere else. But his daughter's fragile cry destroyed that thought. He obeyed. As Irene examined the baby, her hands initially trembled, just slightly, before settling into confident, practiced movements. She checked reflexes, listened to the tiny heartbeat, noted the rash that spoke of more than just a simple fever. Javier watched her in silence. Watched the woman he had once loved care for his child with tenderness that had nothing to do with obligation. And something in his chest twisted painfully. She was brilliant. She always had been. How long has she had the fever? Irene asked without looking at him. About an hour, he replied. Her temperature reached 39.2. She nodded,
okay,
already
I've got
forming
you.
a diagnosis.
We're going to get through
As she
this.
spoke, calmly explaining food protein intolerance, treatment options, and follow-up care, Javier realized something that unsettled him deeply. This woman he had dismissed as a traitor had become extraordinary, and she had done it without him. When she finally met his gaze, there was no accusation in her eyes. Only professionalism. Only distance. And that hurt more than hatred ever could. As he took the prescription from her hand, their fingers brushed. The electricity was instant. Dangerous. Unavoidable. Weekly follow-ups, Irene said coolly. For the first month. Weekly. That meant seeing her again. Again and again. Javier nodded. I'll do whatever it takes, he said quietly. For her. For the baby, or for Irene, neither of them was entirely sure. As he left the room carrying his daughter, Irene stood frozen, heart pounding, eyes burning. She pressed her fingers unconsciously around her wrist. Around the bracelet. She had worn it for 11 years, believing she was the only one carrying the truth of what really happened. What she didn't know, what would soon shatter everything, was that Javier had already
His
begun
oxygen levels are
uncovering the
low.
truth
We need to act quickly.
long
What does
before
that
fate
mean?
brought
Is
them
he in
back
danger?
together.
We need to run more
The way
tests
he
immediately.
looked at her now. The second appointment came exactly 7 days later. Irene had counted every one of them. She told herself it didn't matter. That this was routine. That Javier Llorente was just another anxious parent and his daughter just another patient. Her heart didn't listen. She arrived early, reviewed Sophia's chart twice, and forced herself to focus on numbers, charts, and clinical language instead of memories. The hospital corridor buzzed with morning activity, nurses moving quickly, monitors beeping, life continuing with no regard for unresolved pasts. Then the door opened. Javier walked in carrying his daughter with a tenderness that didn't match the ruthless reputation that preceded him. Sophia looked better, healthier. Her cheeks had color again, her eyes alert and curious. That alone brought Irene professional satisfaction, and something softer she didn't want to name. Good morning, Irene said, keeping her voice neutral. Javier nodded. She's been better. No fever since the second day. Relief flickered across Irene's face before she masked it. She examined Sophia carefully, noting weight gain, clear lungs, improved
little one,
digestion.
let's listen to your heart.
Everything aligned
Good
perfectly
job,
with
you're
her
being so
diagnosis.
brave.
You're doing well, Irene said. She's responding exactly as expected. Javier swallowed. That's because of you. The words lingered in the air. Irene didn't respond. Silence stretched between them, heavy, complicated. 11 years of unsaid words pressed against the small consultation room walls. As Irene documented Sophia's progress, she felt Javier watching her. Not the dismissive glance of a powerful man used to being obeyed, but the careful attention of someone seeing her clearly for the first time. And that unsettled her. Because this wasn't how he used to look at her. Back then, his gaze had been confident, certain, possessive even. Now it was cautious, almost reverent, almost regretful. Dr. Vermejo, Javier said finally. She stiffened at the formality. Yes. There's something I need to ask you. He paused, jaw tightening. About 11 years ago. Her pen stopped mid-word. No, she said quietly. There isn't. Javier flinched as if struck. This is a hospital, she continued, her voice calm but firm. Your daughter is my patient. Anything else is irrelevant. He nodded slowly, absorbing the boundary without protest. I understand. But his eyes said he didn't accept it. As he left that day, Irene leaned against the desk, breathing deeply. Her bracelet felt heavier than usual. The truth surfaced 2 nights later. Javier sat in his childhood home, Sophia asleep against his chest, while his mother watched him from across the room. Elena Llorente had lived long enough to recognize guilt when she saw it. You're seeing her again, Elena said softly. Javier didn't deny it. She's Sophia's pediatrician. Elena's gaze sharpened. And it's not what I thought, he admitted. It never was. That was when Elena finally told him what she had discovered years ago. The message logs that didn't match, the manipulated photograph, the business rival who had benefited from his emotional collapse. Mateo. His former best friend. The realization hit Javier like a slow-burning fire. He hadn't been betrayed. He had been deceived. And he had destroyed the one person who never lied to him. The next appointment changed everything. A wealthy donor entered the pediatric wing that morning, complaining loudly about
You need to
incompetent
sign
staff
this now.
and
I
overpaid
can't,
nurses.
it's against protocol.
His
This
eyes
is
landed
bigger
on
than
Irene,
protocol.
assessing her plain attire, her calm demeanor. Are you even qualified to treat children? He scoffed. Or should I wait for a real doctor? The room went quiet. Irene didn't raise her voice. She simply turned and introduced herself with impeccable professionalism, listing her credentials, awards, published research, and leadership role within the department. The man paled. Apologies spilled out clumsily. And from the doorway Javier watched it all. Watched her command respect without demanding it. Watched karma work swiftly and publicly. For the first time he truly understood the magnitude of what he had lost. As Irene passed him afterward, their eyes met. And this time she saw it clearly. He knew. When the bracelet finally meant something. The bracelet caught the light when Irene reached for the medical chart. Javier noticed it instantly. Not because it was expensive, it wasn't. Not because it was ornate, it was painfully simple. He noticed it because he had fastened it around her wrist himself, 11 years ago, in a small jewelry shop near the sea, hands shaking, heart certain, voice promising a forever he had later shattered.
The latest results
still
are
wore
very promising.
The realization hit him harder than
Thank
any
you, doctor.
accusation
We'll
ever
monitor
could.
closely.
Irene, meanwhile, was doing everything in her power not to acknowledge the weight of his gaze. She focused on Sophia's breathing, on her reflexes, on the steady rhythm of a life that had nothing to do with old wounds. Her progress is excellent, Irene said, writing calmly. We can move to bi-weekly checkups after this month. Javier nodded, but his eyes never left the bracelet. You kept it, he said quietly. Her pen stopped. The room seemed to shrink. I don't discuss personal matters with patients, Irene replied, though her voice betrayed a faint tremor. I know, he said. I just needed to know. She finally looked at him, then really looked, and saw something unfamiliar. Humility. The man who once dismissed her pain without a question now stood unsure, careful with his words, as if every syllable could cause irreparable damage. You already discovered the truth, she said flatly. It wasn't a question. Javier exhaled slowly. Yes. Irene's jaw tightened. And, she asked, did it make you feel better? No, he answered honestly. It made me realize how cruel I was.
All right, little one.
She laughed softly,
Daddy's
not
here.
in amusement
I've got
but
you.
disbelief. I begged you to listen, she said, her composure cracking just enough for the truth to escape. I went to your office. I wrote letters. I borrowed phones just to reach you. And you chose silence. I know. I lost everything that night, she continued. You lost your pride. I lost my future. Javier lowered his gaze. I don't deserve forgiveness, he said. But I do deserve to say this, I'm sorry. The words were simple. Too late. Still powerful. Before Irene could respond, a nurse rushed in, announcing an emergency case, a child from a low-income family being dismissed by another doctor as exaggerated. Irene moved instantly. Javier followed. What he witnessed in the next hour reshaped his understanding of justice. The child's condition was severe. The parents were terrified. The previous doctor had underestimated them because of their clothes, their accent, their fear. Irene didn't hesitate. She advocated fiercely, demanded tests, confronted authority without raising her voice, and saved the child's life. Later, as the family thanked her with tears in their
wonderful
eyes,
evening.
Javier
It really is.
stood silently
To
in the
us.
hallway.
Cheers to that.
This was the woman he
and
had
to many
abandoned.
more.
This was the power he had underestimated. That night he made a decision. If justice had a chance to finish what it started, he would not stand in its way. And Irene, walking home alone, felt the bracelet tighten around her wrist, no longer a memory of love, but proof of endurance. When power finally bowed, the gala invitation sat unopened on Irene's kitchen table for 2 days. Gold lettering. Heavy paper. Prestige disguised as generosity. The annual charity event for the pediatric wing was mandatory for senior staff. A parade of donors, executives, and smiling hypocrisy dressed in elegance. Irene had attended many such events before, always invisible, always underestimated, always mistaken for a nurse or an assistant instead of the lead pediatric specialist she was. This year felt different. She didn't know why, but her chest felt tight every time she thought about walking into a room full of people who measured worth by surnames and bank accounts. And one surname in particular. She almost didn't go. But then she remembered the parents who thanked her with trembling voices. The children whose lives depended on
You
funding
can't
that
hide
came
this
from rooms
forever.
like that.
What choice did
So
I have?
she went.
There's
The
always
ballroom
a choice.
shimmered with
Not for
crystal lights
us.
and polished smiles. Irene arrived alone, wearing a simple emerald green dress, elegant but unassuming. She carried herself with the same quiet confidence she brought into operating rooms. Eyes followed her. Some curious, some dismissive. She looks lost, someone whispered near the champagne table. Probably staff, another murmured. Irene heard them. She always did. Across the room, Javier Llorente stood frozen. He hadn't known she would be there, or perhaps he had hoped she wouldn't. Seeing her outside the hospital, without the armor of her white coat, struck him with brutal clarity. She didn't belong on the margins. She never had. As he moved toward her, a familiar figure intercepted Irene. Mateo. The man who had destroyed everything without consequence for 11 years. Irene, Mateo said smoothly. You look successful. She met his gaze calmly. I am. His smile tightened. We should talk. There are things you don't understand. I understand enough, she replied. Excuse me. Mateo's hand closed around her wrist, around the bracelet. That was when the room shifted. Javier saw it, saw the entitlement, the control. The same manipulation Elena had warned him about. Let her go. The command cut through the music. Mateo turned, surprised. This is between us. No, Javier said coldly. It's been between us for 11 years. Heads turned. Silence spread. Javier stepped forward, his voice steady, carrying authority that commanded attention without force. This woman, he said, gesturing to Irene, is Dr. Irene Vermejo, lead pediatric specialist, award-winning researcher. The reason several children in this city are alive today. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. And for 11 years, Javier continued, she paid the price for a lie told by someone standing very close to her right now. Mateo's face drained of color. Javier didn't stop. I believe that lie. I destroyed her without listening. And today, in front of everyone who values truth, I correct that. The donor board chairman stepped forward. Is this true? Javier nodded once. And I take responsibility. Mateo tried to laugh it off. This is absurd. It's documented, Javier interrupted. Messages. Timelines. Motive. Security appeared quietly. Mateo was escorted out, protests echoing uselessly behind him. Irene stood frozen. Not because she needed saving, but because justice had finally arrived, loudly, publicly, undeniably. The applause started slowly, then grew. For the woman who never defended herself with noise, only with excellence. Javier turned to her. I don't expect forgiveness, he said softly. But I couldn't let them disrespect you again. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. Respect. Not reconciliation. Yet. The truth she never needed but deserved. The hospital was quieter than usual that morning. Rain tapped softly against the tall glass windows, blurring the city into muted shades of gray. Irene stood by the sink in the staff lounge, watching the water run over her hands, trying to calm the storm inside her chest. The gala had changed everything. Not because her name was finally spoken with respect, she had earned that long ago, but because the lie that haunted her for 11 years no longer belonged to her alone. It had been exposed. Publicly. Irreversibly. For the first time since she was 18, Irene felt something unfamiliar settle in her bones. Later that day, Sophia's final follow-up appointment arrived. The baby giggled as Irene examined her, healthy and thriving. Her small fingers wrapped instinctively around the silver bracelet on Irene's wrist. Irene smiled despite herself. She's strong, Irene said. Just like her father. Javier hesitated. Then carefully he spoke. I'm resigning from the hospital board. Irene looked up sharply. Why? Because power means nothing if it's used to stay silent when it matters, he said. And because you don't need my influence hovering around your work. She studied him. This wasn't a grand gesture. It was accountability. I didn't come to ask for a second chance, he continued. I came to thank you. For Sophia. And for surviving me. That earned a quiet exhale of laughter from her. I didn't survive you, Irene said. I survived despite you. He nodded. That's fair. They stood in silence, comfortable now, not lovers, not enemies. Two people standing where truth had finally cleared the ground. As Javier turned to leave, Irene surprised herself. Javier. He paused. The bracelet, she said, touching it gently. I kept it because it reminded me of who I was before everything broke. He swallowed. And now? I don't need it anymore. She unclasped it slowly and placed it into Sophia's tiny palm. For her, Irene said. So she grows up knowing the truth comes back eventually. Javier's eyes burned. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Weeks later, a national medical journal published an article celebrating Irene's work in pediatric advocacy for underserved communities. Donations poured in. Policy changes followed. Her voice, once ignored, now shaped lives far beyond one hospital. She had never asked for justice, but it found her anyway. One evening, walking home beneath soft city lights, Irene felt lighter. No ghosts, no bitterness, just strength. And somewhere behind her, a chapter finally closed. Not with revenge, but with dignity.